if we look at if we look at depression through the paradigm of story, depression is a depressing story about the present and about the future. So what's a depressing story? Large amounts of unnecessary suffering, continuing for no particular reason and getting worse, and then ending in even more chronic and unnecessary suffering. That's a depressing story. No matter what I do, I can't get ahead. That's a depressing story. Everything I try to do to make things better makes it worse. That's a depressing story. So if we understand depression through this particular paradigm, there is a story. If we are depressed, there is a story that we are telling ourselves about the present and about the future that will continue to emerge out of that present that is painful, meaningless, and that we don't want to be there for. In short, a depressing story. And the question in this paradigm is, can we change the story? Now, we can, of course, easily change the story by going insane. We can pretend, for example, that if we hate our job and aren't very good at it, that doing nothing at all, life will get better. And this is rather a depressing story in the long run, because it's unlikely, right? We can say that I'm shit at my job. I'm not going to do anything to get better, but who knows? Life can get better. So the story ties in. If we're to stay sane, the story must converge with reality, with action, right? But we're looking at it from the focus of a story. Can we create a sustainable story that is beautiful, good, true, that's worth living for, that increases the action that comes out of it? Now, it's not always, if the story is that we're shit at our job and there's nothing we can do about it, and we do absolutely nothing about it, and we are shit at our job, meaning we're in the bottom 10% of people doing that particular job, with no effort to change that statistic, well, getting all excited about that situation by a positive attitude, life will just magically work out, is not a sustainable story change. And we might actually have to get good at that job, or we might have to change jobs to a job that we could get good at or are already great at, right? And then we can have a reasonable and sustainable story that says the future is great because I'm doing great work, I'm getting better, I'm helping people, as opposed to, ruining their lives because I don't know what I'm doing. So, so story does have to converge with reality. But there are other times, right? Life in and of itself is meaningless. See, that's not a problem with life. That's a problem with belief, right? Life is as meaningful or as meaningless as we each make it. And a lot of that meaning comes from the stories that we have. There's a story about a person who visited a cathedral. And it's quite remarkable that some of the greatest cathedrals in the world might take more than a century to build, and people were building things step by step that they might die before they ever saw the end of that cathedral. And someone was walking by and a bricklayer was laying bricks in the cathedral and, what are you doing? Well, I'm laying bricks. right? Someone else was putting stucco on the bricks, and, what are you doing? Well, I'm putting on stucco. And there was someone sweeping up the remnants of the construction debris. And, what are you doing? Well, I'm building a cathedral. I'm participating in, a prayer to the divine. I'm part of something beautiful. And that's about the story. One was laying bricks and telling themselves and others the story, that's all I'm doing. I'm just laying bricks. And one was building a cathedral, and that was the story. And so his sweeping was more meaningful to him than the bricklaying was to the bricklayer, because one is just putting bricks in a column, and the other is building a cathedral that has meaning to them. And so the meaning that we have in our life is created by the story. I'm part of life's evolutionary experiment, a grand experiment in which life has gone from almost nothing, a little ball of energy less than the size of a pea. And out of that ball of energy, I, you, and everyone else came, and it keeps getting bigger. Every single day, life gets bigger. Life gets longer. There's more time. There's more space. There's more experiments. And all those things that are going on are interacting with other things that are going on, and new things are being born every day. And the universe keeps getting bigger, and I'm a part of that. I'm one of those little pieces that has emerged. Along with everything else, I'm part of the grand adventure, part of the grand experiment. Well, that's less depressing than, I don't know, my life has no purpose, no meaning. I don't know. And I'm a loser. That's another story. I am a loser. I define myself as a loser. I lose at things. That's what I do. That's who I am. And losers are bad. And losers have no value. Losers are to be treated with contempt, and I'm one of them, right? Well, who wants to live that life, right? So through the paradigm of story, our job, to the extent that we would like to be excited about our life rather than miserable, our job is to create a story that is sustainable, meaning it converges with reality, right? The person sweeping the cathedral is participating in the creation of a cathedral, is creating a cathedral. It's not like he's going to get a rude awakening one day and discover that he's been building a jeep or a prison or something, right? There's convergence with reality, so it's a sustainable story, right? I'm the greatest surgeon in the world is not a sustainable story if you have no surgical practice, and as a result, you kill all of your patients, and then you get sued and thrown in jail for medical malpractice. That's a reasonable outcome if you have no experience and are killing all your patients. So the story is not very sustainable. It may feel great. I'm the greatest surgeon in the world. I'm going to cure everyone who comes into my, sits on my operating table. How do you feel with that story? Oh, I feel great. I feel wonderful. Excited to meet the day, right? Let's get up and go on. And who's my first patient, right? Dead. Okay, who's my second patient? It happens to everyone. Even the best surgeon in the world kills someone from time to time, but who's dead. It's not a sustainable story, right? I'm the greatest investor. I just lose all my money. So converging with reality is an important part of sustainability, right? So what's the most interesting, sustainable story, right? So that I don't have to keep moving town every 3 weeks when my medicine doesn't work, when my psychic prophecies weren't fulfilled, right? So I don't have to keep moving town every 3 weeks, so that I can pay my bills, right? And as opposed to running from creditors and all of that. And, my lovers don't hate me after 6 months. I'm the greatest lover in the world for 3 months or 2 months or 1 day or before we have sex. And then, it falls apart, right? So what's an interesting and great story that I want to tell? And the skill and the willingness and the integrity, the integration, the strengthening is to actually integrate heart, mind, and body. So, the story is a mental construction. The feelings relate to, the story, but the story has to relate to the body, to the world, to reality, and find, an integrated mesh of strength, right? That's strong enough to weather the things that will come that are painful and depressing at times. But if you have a strong story and a meaningful purpose, all meaning, by the way, all meaningful purposes have to do with facilitating sustainable well-being for yourself and others, and the planet that is part of that, right? If the planet dies, so do all the people. So a sustainable picture, a sustainable story that does not include the host body we all depend on is not very sustainable. I mean, it may be fine to, destroy everything for 100 years, but, after maybe 1,000 years or 10,000 years, it eventually falls apart. Like if you're sitting on a branch and busy cutting it off, it may be fine halfway through the branch, but eventually you're going to fall. It's not sustainable in the end. And all meaning comes from creating sustainable well-being and healing or preventing chronic and unnecessary suffering. All meaning comes from that. You save someone's life. So what? Why does that mean? Well, because their well-being is continued. You rescued someone from a fire. Why is that meaningful? Because the horror of being burned alive, which you removed, is profoundly meaningful to every human being who experiences it. Because we are innately driven to feel sustainably better and to avoid feeling chronically worse. And a lot of what depression is a story that we're not going to feel sustainably better, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's a lie. There is something we can do about it. Right? We may be in prison, we may be in chains, we may be bullied, but there is something that we can do to make things sustainably better for ourselves and for other people. And as we embark on that, our life has purpose and meaning. The idea that I'm going to make a lot of money. Why? So that I can feel sustainably better. And we have the purpose and the sense of meaning along that until we discover, unfortunately, that making vast amounts of money does not make us feel sustainably better. I mean, it may help us avoid the suffering and chronic suffering of abject poverty, but, after a few $100,000 a year in maybe 300, 400, at a certain point, going from 10 million to 20 million, going from 1 billion to 300 billion, doesn't actually create any more meaningful well-being for us, right? There's only so much food we can eat. But if we share that with other people, now we have purpose, now we have meaning, because if we take $300 billion and invest it in reforestation and plant 300 billion trees, well, that makes a huge difference in air quality. If we take an entire desert with $300 billion, turn one desert green for the next 100 years, buy the desal plants, put in the tunnels, purchase the seedlings, hire the unemployed of the world to transform a desert. Well, that has meaning. A desert is becoming alive because I did this. My life has meaning. That's not depressing. That's exciting, right? 300 million Ferraris is at some point boring, right? You can't even drive them all in a lifetime. It's all the space, all the cars to wash. It becomes silly, right? Because the story isn't sustainable. The idea that if I was the richest person in the world and had 300 million Ferraris, the idea may be sustainable as long as you haven't done it, right? But as you do it, and what am I doing with my life? How does this create well-being, right? That's the question. That's when the story falls apart. When you're doing these things that you thought that the cult told you would be so meaningful, would change your life, and you realize, no, it doesn't. It doesn't provide sustainable well-being. So there's an art, right? There's an art to create meaning. And the art is intelligence, the efficiency with which we transform energy, time, money, and natural resources into sustainable well-being. There's an art to that. We're good at that art or we're bad at it, right? I spent all last year doing all these things so I could be happy. And how do you feel? Miserable. And how do the people around you feel? Afraid of me, angry, miserable, right? And so it was a complete failure, right? So what's the story around that? Do you say that because you spent a year of your life as a complete failure that it's pointless, you might as well give up on life? Or let's analyze everything I did wrong. What were all the assumptions that I had about how this was going to make me happy? And what were the assumptions of those employees and those things that all don't like me anymore, right? What was that, right? We're saving the planet so we can be rude to each other and do this and that because it's all for a greater good, and criticize to get the most out of people. What were the assumptions that make us all feel so terrible, right? So is there a story that you are able and willing to construct that converges with reality, right? It's everyone else's fault. Okay. You can probably hold on to that one a fair amount and point out the faults in lots of other people. But that's depressing, isn't it? Because you don't have control over all those other people, so you're just screwed. You're the innocent victim waiting for the endless faults of other people to come in, which is a depressing reality. So you haven't solved depression with that story. It's all my fault. That's also a depressing story, right? Because it isn't actually all your fault. You didn't single-handedly start the fracking business. You didn't invent nuclear weapons. Corruption, you weren't the most corrupt person in the planet. You may have been corrupt, but you didn't start it as an idea. Someone had the idea thousands of years ago. Oh, we could lie and get some short-term benefit, right? And you may have copied that idea, but you're not the source of all problems. And if you try and solve all problems, because that's the implication, right? You're to blame for everything. And so now you've got to solve everything. Well, then all the things you don't have any influence of, you're going to blame yourself for it. It's not going to be a very interesting life. But what about a story that all pain can be learned from if you approach it with a certain amount of humility and interest, and do some experiments and read books from other people that have figured it out or figured some part of it out, and then write a book yourself of what you figure out? Is that possible? Is that going to make that pain more meaningful? Probably. So that's one story. Or I don't have to be punished for other people's crimes. That's another story, right? I may be white, My grandparents may have been a son of a bitch to all kinds of African American slaves, and I could have a story that I deserve to be punished for the rest of my life. Well, is that exciting? Are you excited about that life? Or are you depressed, right? So we're looking at, okay, what about the idea that I can make some amends? It's not all my fault. And, let's participate in a cultural change. Not as I'm evil and deserve to be punished, but I'm a participant in this change, and I can do this and this to facilitate less racism. How about that? Is that more, it's meaningful, it's reducing suffering. Am I interested in participating? Am I excited to participate in that? No, I don't want to do it. So there's an art here, right? And the art is the art of concocting a story of meaning, a path of meaning, which is a path to well-being, a path to helping other people experience more sustainable well-being. And I guarantee you that if you create a believable story, which just means that you believe it, it's not real, it's not even true, but it has to be true enough that you believe it, right? So, if you're putting $100 a day into a very intelligent investment fund, a diversified portfolio of real estates and growth stocks and whatever, and you're putting $100 a day and doing all this stuff and reading different investment books and tracking people with good investment history, it's not too hard to believe that in 50 years you will have a large investment portfolio. It's hard to believe. It's not hard for me to believe that, right? We all can believe whatever we want, but that's pretty believable to me. This year I set aside this much, and now this, and now I bought the dip, and if that's an exciting story for you, and you're willing to do the bits, to earn the skills and progress in your job and put the money aside. Well, now you've got a believable story that you believe, right? And so that's going to now be more exciting than the idea that you're going to get old, no longer able to work, and become homeless because you're not putting anything, away, right? Or if you learn something practical, like how to cook great food, and you learn a new recipe every day, and you cook it, you get better at it, and you either become a chef or share it with other people, and people love the food, and you get better and better and better at cooking. You offer it to the neighbors. Well, can you believe that people are going to enjoy your food? Hello, welcome to the neighborhood. I enjoy cooking. May I offer you from any one of 500 dishes that I love to cook? Any doubt that if you do that 300 or 400 times, that there will be at least some people who love your food and appreciate all your effort, right? But I wouldn't enjoy that. Well, what would you enjoy? What would you enjoy that would make you happy or make other people happy and thus give meaning to your life? And what are you going to do more of day by day that takes you in that direction? Because, you may start out very slowly, and if you're tired and depressed and have very little energy, you may go quite slowly. But, you can walk across the United States at a rate of 10 miles a day, just walk 1 mile an hour for 10 hours a day. And, it's very slow, hobbling along. You can do it on a cane. You can get a ride from time to time. But, you're going in a good direction. So it does take, initiative and skill, right? And if you have initiative and skill, obviously your belief in your ability to be less depressed is going to be higher than if you have no initiative and no skill, including the initiative to gather skills and you just wait around, right? That's a harder thing. So this requires initiative. But you can create a story. You could start by creating, what are some of the stories I'd like that I would be excited about, right? If you're highly interested in sex, for example, stories in which lots of people want to have sex with you, maybe that's not a depressing future. That's an exciting future. Okay, so what would you have to do, based on what you know of the world, for a lot of people to want to have sex with you? And are you willing and able to do any of them? Well, even if things improve sexually 5 or 10% a month, is that unreasonable? It may be if you're a quadriplegic and broken, an addict, and are suicidal. I mean, it could be very hard from that position to go to make 10% improvement, but if you've got arms, you've got this, could you study this? Could you read this? Could you go deeper into sexuality and create emotional sex, mental sex, where you share an idea and explore the nuances of it, where you empathize with emotions or do, acro yoga or things together that start attuning the body, or create peak experiences with another human being. It's a very fun activity, by the way. Take an hour and you brainstorm back and forth, a stranger or a friend. What would be a peak experience for you? What's one element of a peak experience? What would be the peak smell, the peak taste, the peak sound, the most exquisite evening you could imagine? Well, this is my favorite version of Schubert's Symphony in D minor, right? Okay, well, let's include that, into the recipe. Okay, so we've got some soundscape. What about your favorite scents? Lemon essential oil mixed with a bit of lavender. Okay, so how much does a diffuser cost? $23? Okay, so we've got peak scent, peak sound. Okay, we're moving somewhere, and what's the setting, and what's the time, and how do you create a peak experience? And this is a peak experience for me, and this is a peak experience for you, and we both like the same soundscape. Not bad, right? You mean that's a peak for you and a peak? Okay, we've got overlap, right? Create peak experiences with strangers or friends, with anyone who's willing to create a peak experience. Create one for yourself. Design it carefully out. Could I do it? And do I have a peak experience as I follow my own recipe? If not, why not, right? Learn about this. Is that an interesting future where every month I'm going to have a peak experience with somebody? How am I going to do it? Maybe I'll do a blog about peak experiences. And then I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do that. Anyone? No? Okay, I'll make another blog post. Here's another one, this. And at some point, someone's interested in peak experience. Why? Because it feels good, right? That's the whole definition. We all want to feel better and want to feel worse. So if I create a story like, could I imagine somebody would want to have a peak experience with me? Probably, right? And then, how to do it, right? So there's integration with the world and with other people and with yourself, knowing what you want. How would I know that? Well, what about a book? What do I want? What do people want? Well, maybe I'll read a book on that. Well, would I read a book? Nah. What about a YouTube video? What do people want? Could I search for that? Would I do that? Yeah, I would. I don't like reading books, but I would. Okay, then do it. Right? My point is that once you've identified some stories that you like, that you're interested in, that a life that you'd like to live, and not just think you'd like to live because other people have told you, but you know yourself well enough. I'd actually enjoy that. Like being very famous is often a huge pain in the neck. You don't realize it's a huge pain in the neck until people are constantly taking photographs of you, criticizing you, doing all this stuff, and then you realize, oh, it's a huge pain in the neck, right? So, but do you know yourself to know enough of what you really, really like? It creates well-being for you without harming anyone, right? Because it's not as sustainable. See, if you have to harm people to enjoy yourself, it's not sustainable, because eventually you're going to harm enough people that they're going to get pissed, right? And then they're going to stop you from doing the thing that harms them, which happens to be what you like, right? So it's more clumsy. It's not as skillful to create something you like that upsets a lot of people, right? It takes more skill to create something you really, really like that doesn't harm anyone, right? And sometimes you have to move location. If you want to play loud music, for example, a senior retirement meditation center is not the place, right? But a big field out here where farmers desperately trying to find some income, please, somebody rent this field. I'm tired of growing potatoes. Rent this field. Well, suddenly you've got your place, right? Where farmers delighted, have another rock festival, right? Good job. And the music can be as loud as you want. So, that you have to figure out a story. What is it that you really, really want, and how do you go about it? But here's the thing. As soon as you create a story that you believe and start taking action to create that, you will be less depressed. And by the time that you're living it, if you're intelligent enough to know to be real, like some people say, I want to be off in nature in the wilderness with no TV and just writing. And they go off in nature in the wilderness and they feel depressed, bored, and where's the TV, right? And so they didn't actually know themselves. What they really want is to watch TV and think about being off in the wilderness and not actually do it, right? And so you have to figure these things out, right? So there's a lot around this of converging reality and the story, creating a life that's, worth living in some way or another. Is there any place in the world you'd really, really like to live? What would be some steps, right? Because the moment you commit to putting all your energy towards something really meaningful, meaning that makes you really, really happy and doesn't harm other people, the moment you commit to that, you're less depressed because you have a less depressing future. But you've got to create the story. You've got to believe the story is possible. And then you've got to do the work to make the story real, to bring it into being. So that's one kind of whole version, and that's a more dynamic version. But in other cases, you've just got to stop believing certain dogmas that you've inherited from your cult. For example, the rational, reductionist, materialistic cult thought, the dogma. You see, they say that you can't prove God exists, which is true. But they can't prove that God doesn't exist. But they're absolutely sure, right? They are very faithful in their denigration of anything bigger than themselves. They're very faithful. They have tremendous faith in their dogmas, right? Nothing exists. Anything beyond that is delusion. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist, they say with great faith. How do you know? Can you prove that in a laboratory? No, but we know, right? So sometimes you just have to let go of other people's dogmas, other people's faiths. They believe with absolute certainty that their life has absolutely no meaning. One of the most interesting things about atheistic, materialistic, rationalistic, dogmatic people that say that life has no purpose and no meaning and that consciousness is random and means absolutely nothing and is probably just some meaningless delusion, right? But then they write a book about it, right? How meaningless everyone is. And they want you to buy it. And the question is why? Why do they want you to buy their book if everything they think is a delusion and has no meaning? See, they don't even hold up to their own dogma. They really believe that their dogmas about materialism are so important that you should waste your time reading their books, and you should buy them. Meaningless, dogmatic things about nothing. Why should I buy them if they're meaningless and they come from a head of a conscious person who has absolutely no basis or meaning in existence? That's just you just randomly wrote all those thoughts for no apparent reason. Why are you so attached to them then, right? It doesn't add up. Someone who believes in their importance and their faith and their this, it adds up while they would write a book. But why would you write a book and tell everyone they've got to understand that they have no importance? Because you said so. And you're someone who has no importance, who knows absolutely nothing, who's just a random figment of life's chance. Why would we want to listen to a random figment of life's chance? It makes no sense. And they do book tours. Why do they bother? Everything they say is nonsense, according to them. It's just the human mind, random, and then they're going to die, and it's all meaningless. Why? What on earth are they doing out in a book tour? They've already said that everything they've done is meaningless, so just give it a rest and watch TV. So anyway, you have to construct this, but it may also just be throwing that out. That's nuts. Maybe I am part of a mysterious purpose. It's a little bit less depressing than I'm certain I have no purpose. Maybe I'm part of a mysterious purpose. It's another story. Well, where does that lead me? What do I think about? Mysterious acts of kindness? Maybe I could become a neighborhood angel for no particular reason. Just watch people outside the windows trying to figure out who did all these nice things in the neighborhood. Who left this for so-and-so and wrote a nice card. Who planted the flowers there at midnight, Suddenly people are alive, right? It's a little bit more interesting, that life, right? So that's generally the terrain we're in. So in the comments below, what are some of the stories that you create, that you believe, that are very, very depressing? And do you see any way out? Or does anyone else? And are you interested in other people? Now, it's very, very common that advice doesn't understand these things. So you'd have to do a really good job of laying all the problems out. And many stories are very hard to find a way out of, right? I've lost my dad, I've got PTSD, I've got no money, everyone I go out with seems to abuse me, I don't know why. I'm very angry because I'm in pain, and so nobody wants to spend time with me because I'm angry. And I've got a culture that doesn't understand what to do about these types of things. And I'm in that culture surrounded by morons who gave me all this stuff to deal with and don't know how to help me, right? That's pretty tough, right? But what's the bit that makes it even tougher? That there's absolutely nothing that you can do about that, right? That there's no book that would help you, that you couldn't grow your own food even if you wanted to. There's so many loopholes in our stories because they're all ultimately held together by faith and belief and a sense of certainty. Is there some way that you can crack the story and that you want to? And do you want help in cracking the story and dialoguing? Or do you want to say, no, it's pointless, and that's it, right? Because even if you're terminally ill, there are nice ways to die of a terminal illness. There are nice ways to commit suicide. You could have a big party, spend all your credit cards, doing various things, and at the right moment, slit your wrists in a hot tub, right? After instructing people not to revive you and whatever, and then leave a nice gift for everyone at the party. There are better ways of doing it than, oh my gosh, I can't face another day with being such a schmuck. I will catch fire to my hair in the oven, right? I mean, it's not quite as effective, quite as elegant. So how do I basically take the story that's so miserable I'm depressed and turn it into a story that is at least might have a happy ending? It might, it's like maybe this, maybe that, you don't know, right? But it might have a happy ending. And am I happy about that? Or am I furious, right? Because I've gotten so comfortable in my fatality, my fatalism, right? Never's going to work out. Never. Now I'm in control, right? I know everything, so it never will work out. I've just decided that, and I know everything. And now I have a sense of control and certainty. And I'm quite happy to be miserable as long as I'm in control of it and certain about it. Right? That it might be better is, very upsetting. I don't feel as control. It's not very hard to ruin things. So if you have a very dismal story, you can usually make it happen, right? You're going to die an early death. You can figure out how to do that, right? So there's a little bit more certainty with dark stories. And so if you really are insecure and need certainty, you might have to create a worst case scenario and believe it, right? But is there any other way you could build certainty and create a story that is a little bit more enjoyable, has some possible, and so that's really how to work within the framework of depression and story. And Byron Katie, by the way, happens to be good at this particular way of working with depression, at basically unraveling and questioning and creating less belief in the most miserable of stories that depress us, right? So Byron Katie has YouTube videos and various books, etc. So if this particular approach appeals to you of working with it within the framework of story, you might find it might be enraging. What a dumb thing. This is the way it is, and so then this may not be the thing for you, right? But it is a fact that our story about the future that we believe creates a tremendous amount of our human state. Whatever's going on right now, if we believe that in 10 minutes it's going to be wonderful, we're going to feel not depressed. If we believe it, right? And if we have a story that we believe that life is bad, meaningless, painful, and is going to get worse, and there's nothing we can do about it, we will get more and more depressed. That is a fact. How to work with it, what approach to take for you, that's more unique. And whether this is the right doorway to working with depression is unique, as opposed to taking medication or talking to a therapist or whatever. But this is one of the doorways to change the story to a brighter future that we believe in and act to create. Thank you.